Hey everyone, welcome to our 2021 Returning Sponsors SFSP training. We're so happy that you've joined us today. A lot of this information is going to look similar if you were able to sit in on the SFA training that we had last month. It's going to look a little bit similar to that. But of course, we're glad to have everyone here. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to turn it over to LDH, to Miss Elena Carlin. She's going to be giving us a presentation on LDH and health safety, health inspections, permitting, those sorts of things. It's really great information. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to her.
Hello everyone, this is Elena Carlin. I'm with the Retail Food Program, and I am going to be talking to you guys about summer feeding program today. Please let me know if y'all can in the chat. If someone can communicate with me if you're having trouble hearing me. Hopefully everything goes well. And we will go ahead and start moving on. Let's see. Give me 1 second. Here we are. Okay, so we're going to be talking about the summer feeding food service sponsors. So sponsors must apply for permits for each feeding and or cooking site through the local LDH office. Existing SFAs must inform the parish sanitarian's office of the SFA status on whether summer feeding will be provided, inform the parish of the operations that will take place, and please include the locations or delivery routes of the sites, congregate, if you're providing congregate versus non-congregate meals. And also, if you are providing non-congregate meals, are you providing single day meals versus multiple meals? Also, who will be providing the meals? And also provide a plan for how food will be delivered safely. Only schools that are part of the USDA National Breakfast and School Lunch Program do not require an additional LDH permit to operate. The congregate summer feeding site and our cooking site, however, must have an LDH permit. If the school serves food at a different location, however, except for those grab and go sites with no food holding overnight and no food preparation, then the school or the site will need a permit at that other feeding site location. Also, sites must have a Louisiana Department of Education approved sponsor. Also, the temporary permit will expire. So for Title 51, Part 23, retail food establishments, that is our code, and that requires that anyone who sells or distributes food have a LDH permit to operate. The sponsor site or site needs a LDH permit to distribute food. However, again, just reiterating, non-congregate grab and go sites with no food holding overnight and no food preparation, they will not be need a permit to operate. Again, you must meet the sanitary code requirements. That's Louisiana Administrative Code, Title 51, Part 23, for retail food establishments. That can be found on our website, eatsafe.la.gov. There are different types of sites, many different types of sites actually this year and as of last year as well. So full service kitchens, those include both full service kitchens, satellite kitchens, outdoor sites, mobile units. Those are typically all congregate feeding sites. And then they also have an allowance for non-congregate feeding sites where you can either provide grab and go sites or grab and go meals or meals for delivery to homes. There has been a updated USDA waiver stating that you can provide for non-congregate meals until September 30th, 2021. So for full service kitchens, those are kitchens that prepare, cook, and or heat food to serve. These sites will be required to have all the necessary equipment that a restaurant would have, would need at least. Those include a 3-compartment sink, hand sinks at your food preparation and ware washing areas, also a grease trap, cold holding equipment, and hot holding equipment if you are providing hot holding, sanitizer test strips for washing, rinsing, and sanitizing, a mop sink, and a dumpster pad. and restrooms for staff and children dining at the site. The hand sink is also necessary for the children to wash their hands, and that hand sink must be outside of a food prep area. It can't be in a food prep area. Now, there are also satellite kitchens. These are kitchens where no food preparation takes place. Foods provided from a sponsor, full run service summer feeding site, or from a commercial kitchen with an LDH food and drug permit, manufacturing permit, excuse me. The utensils must be returned to the preparation site to the prep site for proper dishwashing and sanitizing. And all food items must arrive on temperature, and a log must be used to record dates, times, and temperatures of the food. You also have to retain those logs for 3 years plus the current year as required by the USDA and LGOE. Here at the satellite kitchen, there may be minimal food assembly. And with congregate dining, a hand sink again must be available with hot water, soap and paper towels for children and servers to wash their hands. And as well, they will need restrooms for staff and children dining at the site. Now, congregate feeding sites only, there are minimal requirements for the feeding sites that must be met for a permit to be issued. They must have access to equipment and plumbing noted as available at the site. Again, children must be able to wash their hands prior to eating. And a temporary permit will be issued for dates provided by your sponsor. The permit must be posted at the feeding site for all days of service. For congregate dining outdoor sites, all food must arrive as a packaged unit. Here, there's no food assembly allowed. Utensils must be returned to the prep site for proper dishwashing and sanitizing. Containers also must be maintained clean, and a hand sink with hot water, soap and paper towels must also be available for children, servers, and restrooms must be available as well. Congregate dining mobile units. These are traveling food establishments. These may not be practical with the COVID-19 limitations. Here, all food must arrive as a packaged unit. No food assembly on the mobile unit is allowed for this type of site or this type of food establishment. The food package or plate of food must be assembled at the commissary instead. The safest meals are shelf stable. However, if food is transported to the sites that is potentially hazardous, the mobile unit must use time as public health control for the food. And that basically means that the food can arrive off temperature, meaning it can arrive above 41 or below 135. However, it can only be off temperature for up to 4 hours, and after that, food has to be discarded. You also have to have the discard time where it has to on the food. So if it doesn't have a discard time, then that's not going to be a valid means for providing the food. You also have to provide a written plan to the health department, keep logs from the time that it came out of your cooking equipment or your holding equipment to the time it needs to be discarded. Also, for the mobile food establishments, you have to have a permitted base of operations. That's basically a LDH permitted food establishment. And you would also have to have a commissary letter from that establishment, just stating that they are allowing you to use their establishment as your commissary. And this is where you're going to report daily for supplies and cleaning services. Also, it'll be provided for dumping and flushing liquid waste from the wastewater tank. And also you want to get your potable water from the commissary as well. You'll also, again, store your food at that commissary. You won't be able to store your food overnight at a home, for example. You would have to store it at a commissary. The congregate feeding mobile unit. It also has, again, it could have some restrictions with COVID-19. Restrooms must be provided by the stop site, and a hand sink with hot water, soap, and paper towels must be available for children and servers at the site. It is possible that the site or the mobile unit provide a portable hand sink, but again, they must make sure that they have potable water and the wastewater is discarded, typically at the commissary. The operator also must include a schedule of the proposed times and address of the stops on the route. Now, there are some differences between congregate mobile food establishments versus non-congregate delivery vehicles. You can see those two pictures here on our slide. Congregate mobile food establishments are basically traveling food establishments that are, again, permitted by LDH. Food is packaged at the commissary. Typically, only a single meal is served in this situation, and it requires Times public health control. Children eat at the site. Again, may not be feasible during COVID-19, and children must wash hands prior to the meal at the site. Restrooms are also required at the site versus the non-congregate delivery vehicles. These are typically where you will see the grab and go meals and delivery meals to homes. These are typically refrigerated trucks or other approved delivery vehicles, depending on the sponsor's plan, packaging and meals served. Also, the delivery vehicle doesn't require an LDH permit. They are allowed to deliver one meal per recipient. In that case, they would have to use either time and temperature control for safety or Times public health control, or deliver multiple meals, multiple days of meals per recipient at a time. And in that case, with multiple days of meals, you can only use time and temperature control for safety only, meaning the temperature has to remain at 41 or below or 135 and above. Also, labels are required on packaged food for single and multiple meals, and a hand sink is not required, or restrooms are not required at those grab and go sites or meal delivery to homes. Just give me 1 minute. Also, so we're going to move on to the application for permit. So any site that does not have a current annual LDH permit to operate must also submit a retail food plant review packet questionnaire. So a mouthful, I know. And then with that, you're going to include a floor plan and a menu, in addition to the summer feeding questionnaire. You'll submit that to the local sanitarian's office. Any first-time use site that has never been used as a summer feeding site must submit a retail food plant review packet questionnaire and the summer feeding application. For previous school food authority sponsors with no change in operation from previous year submission, only the summer feeding application is required. Now, the congregate mobile food units also will have to submit a plant review packet questionnaire, but this one is specific to mobile food establishments. Both of those questionnaires can be found at our website, eatsafe.la.gov. Okay, so when submitting a questionnaire, it should be filled out and submitted to the sanitarian's office a minimum of 2 weeks before the summer feeding service begins. It takes time for our sanitarians to review the plans, and they also are reviewed first come, first serve. You want to make sure that you include a floor plan of the space and the sample menu. The local health department staff may ask for additional information that may prolong the permitting process. So please don't wait to the last minute. You'll have until May 15th to apply with LDOE as a sponsor. If the site manager does not own the site location, please also submit a site agreement with the owner of the site. For example, if you are using a church and the church is not technically the sponsor, they're just going to be the actual site location, then the church should submit a site agreement that is going to allow the sponsors and site to use their location. You also want to let them know, let the health department know which equipment will be allowed to be used for that summer feeding site, and also the times that summer feeding meals will be served. In regards to transportation of food, sponsors who plan to deliver or have delivered prepared food to multiple feeding sites, grab and go sites, and meal delivery routes, you must submit locations or routes of all feeding sites. That includes non-congregate grab-and-go sites and non-congregate meal delivery routes. So in regards to meal delivery to homes, Louisiana Department of Health doesn't want to know the individual recipient home locations or the names or contact information. We just want to know those delivery routes. We also want to know proposed delivery times. Also submit a written plan explaining the delivery plan for holding food at a safe temperature, and also train your staff on how to monitor and record temperatures. Also, each unit must, in regards to mobile units, these are not the non-congregate delivery of meals or grab and go, but in regards to actual mobile units, each unit must submit an application packet. The operator must include a schedule of the proposed feeding times and address of stops on the route. And also, if potentially hazardous food is served, then a written plan for using time as public health control must be submitted. Logs must be maintained, and it's the responsibility of the cooking site to mark when food was taken out of temperature control. It's also a responsibility of the feeding site to mark when the food is used or discarded. And also remember to provide a commissary letter to the health department. Some basic plumbing requirements, those are going to be determined by the chief building official in the city or parish office who regulates the plumbing. Those include the restroom fixture counts and grease trap sizing. Please also be sure to contact the chief building official early so that there's no delay for the approval of the site. Once your plans have been approved, what happens next? So after your plans are approved, an approval letter will be sent to the applicant. You must contact the local LDH office to schedule a pre-opening inspection. The inspector will schedule your inspection for that opening inspection, and you also must call in advance to let them know whenever you're ready to be inspected. A person with the legal authority to sign for the sponsor must sign the temporary permit to operate either before or at the time of inspection. And then also a person in charge or the PIC of the summer feeding site must be on site at the time of inspection. Typically the manager of the site is the one who's going to sign that. So as far as inspections, whenever we do our opening inspection, the site needs to be ready for service. Refrigeration should be at 41 or below. Hot water, sanitizers, test strips, and paper towels must be provided. And the permits will not be backdated to include dates of service previous to the issuance of the permit. In some cases, based on the length of service, a second routine inspection is required if longer than 31 days of operation, and we don't announce those times that we are coming in. The opening inspection you will be aware of. However, if you have to have a second re-inspection, it will be unannounced. Summer feeding site, for the summer feeding site permit, the issuing of a temporary permit occurs when all requirements are satisfied and the site passes an inspection. The site must not operate until a permit has been issued, and permits are not transferable. The end date of the permit indicates the end of the food service. If extensions are needed, the sponsor should contact the local LDH office to request an inspection or an extension, excuse me. If you need an extension, then you have to request an extension. Post the temporary permit from LDH and the inspection reports at the feeding site during the hours of operation. Also, remember the feeding site must have a temporary permit to operate. Make sure to submit the summer feeding application and retail food plan review packet questionnaire if needed, at least 2 weeks before you plan to operate. Don't wait until the last minute. And again, the deadline to apply for sponsors is May 15th. Some more helpful information can be found at our website. We have a link for summer feeding and also for new businesses. It gives details on how to open a food establishment, pre-opening checklists, and pre-inspection information. You can also contact your local LDH office for the summer feeding site questionnaire. And also, if you do need to go into the office, please call ahead of time because our field stands typically and may be out inspecting and someone may not be available. So please call ahead of time to not waste your time. If you have any questions in regards to applying or requirements, feel free to contact us at our email, or you can contact LDOE as well. But I'm going to go ahead and move on. Also, Carol is my supervisor, Carol Newsetzer. She is unavailable today. However, you may be able to reach her another time at her email or her phone. And you can also email me or call me as well. Thank you. We're going to go ahead and move on to the summer feeding program 2021 for food safety. We're going to touch on COVID-19 information. So you want to make sure that you're staying up to date with Louisiana's latest COVID-19 phase restrictions during summer feeding. And Open Safely is the website where you can find the latest documents and updates. Currently, we're in phase 3. Right now, we don't have any building capacity limits. However, they still do require social distancing, face coverings, that you monitor symptoms, and also no self-service or buffet style service of food. Also, you must observe social distancing and hand hygiene. Please make sure you're washing hands. Children are washing hands, especially before they eat at the site. Portable hand sinks may be used, but they are not a replacement for permanent plumbed fixtures. You must fill the potable water and discard the wastewater, plus clean and sanitize the fixture. Also, they may use hand sanitizer, however, it doesn't replace hand washing. This is just an example of how to properly wear your face mask. And you also want to keep in mind social distancing, even though we don't have the capacity restrictions right now for buildings. It's possible that it may go back into effect. We're hoping not, obviously, but just be aware of social distancing at this moment. And also, this is a good model for those grab and go sites on how to social distance. Now, in regards to general food safety, including summer feeding, is kind of all the same. You want to make sure that you have your required items. Here's a checklist of some items that's required typically for most of your sites. Give me 1 minute. So they include a ambient air temperature thermometer for coolers, product thermometers to check food product. Temperature log is also required anytime food is transported, and also approved sanitizer to sanitize product thermometers and work surfaces. Sanitizer test kit appropriate for the type of sanitizer used, and warmers or other equipment that keep hot food hot at 135 or above, and coolers that keep food cold at 41 or below. The hand sink with hot soap, you need a hand sink with hot soap and paper towels, hot water, soap and paper towels, and or hand dryers for servers and children if eating at the site. Children, again, cannot enter the food preparation space. In a full service kitchen, the 3-compartment sink must be available with detergent and sanitizer for washing dishes and equipment. And a grease trap is required for full service kitchens or sites with annual permits. For food safety, prevention of foodborne illnesses, there are a few characteristics or key points to remember. Hand washing is key. Make sure that you wash hands often, at least 20 seconds with hot soapy water. Don't cross-contaminate your food. Keep raw away from ready to eat, and try not to touch your ready to eat food with your bare hands. And you want to make sure that you clean and sanitize surfaces. Use hot soapy water to clean, then rinse, then sanitize, and make sure you have the appropriate amounts for your sanitizer. So for chlorine, it's 50 to 100 parts per million, and for quaternary ammonia, it's 200 parts per million. We have a hand washing sign. Basically, it describes all the times when you need to wash hands. After coughing, sneezing, handling raw foods, smoking, after using the restroom, taking out the trash, touching anything dirty, before putting on gloves. And what we don't have on here is after eating, and before and after eating really, but specifically after eating, before you go to prepare more foods. For plumbing, all permitted sites must have accessible hand sinks for food handlers in the kitchen area, and all permitted sites must have a hand sink accessible to the children if congregate dining takes place. Unless serving prepackaged food only, the site must have a 3-compartment sink. Sites must have a mop sink or other means of disposing mop water. And for crease trap requirements, contact your local chief building official. So other ways to prevent foodborne illness is to cook foods to the proper temperatures, hold food at the proper temperatures. That means 41 or below for cold and 135 and above for hot foods. And that also includes travel time. And if leftovers are permitted, then you also must chill food properly. You have 6 hours total to chill food, 2 hours to get the food down to 70 degrees, and then another 4 hours to get down to 41 degrees. You do have to reheat your foods to 165 for 15 seconds if you are reheating. These are the minimum cooking temperatures for food products. 145 degrees Fahrenheit for 15 seconds for slab meats such as pork, eggs for immediate service, fish and other beef slab meats, for example, require 145 for 15 seconds. Comminuted meats are basically ground meats, chopped meats, for example, such as ground beef or fish sticks, for example, would be 155. And also eggs that were hot held for service, eggs that are kept on a warmer. And also poultry is 165 for 15 seconds. Many people know about poultry, but they may not know about stuffing that contains fish, meat, or pasta or poultry, and any product that needs to be cooked in the microwave. If you look at the picture of the refrigerator on the side, it also shows you how to properly store your food products. You want your ready-to-eat foods on top, unwashed vegetables, fruits and vegetables below that, then your raw products, fish, eggs, slab steak, for example, at 145, and then ground beef below that, 155, and chicken at 165 at the very bottom. Also, you want to make sure that you are aware of major food allergens. These are the 8 major ones. There are other food allergens, but these are the most common. Those are peanuts, nuts, dairy, eggs, soy, fish, crustaceans, and gluten or wheat. Also, to prevent foodborne illnesses, you must obtain food from an approved source. In this case, your approved source is going to be the cooking site where the food is prepared. And typically, the approved source should be transported from the food should be transported from a SFA school or prepared in an LDH permitted kitchen with an LDOE approved sponsor. All food is to be delivered at the proper temperature, 41 or below, or 135 or above, for whenever you're dealing with congregate food transportation. And foods held improperly are more likely to contain pathogens, and food that's not delivered at proper temperatures must be rejected in these cases. Congregate dining food transportation also should, basically it should also be delivered when food is delivered, temperatures are to be recorded by site staff. Food temperature should be taken at the prep site and again at the serving site. Both temperatures must be marked in the log and follow protocol if temperature abuse has taken place, meaning if it's in the temperature danger zone between 135 and 41 degrees Fahrenheit. Also, store food in proper holding equipment on site and serve food immediately. Food delivery time should be short, and provide a written plan to your local LDH office stating how food will be transported and how you plan to ensure it's safely delivered. Time is public health control. This is when mechanical refrigeration or mechanical hot holding is not available. A written policy must be available at each site. Logs must be kept by the sponsor kitchen and the feeding site, and food must be marked with a discard time. All food must be served or discarded within 4 hours after removed from mechanical control. In this case, when using time as public health control, you cannot have leftovers. Shelf-stable items may be reserved, however, if done properly. This is an example log of time as public health control. You will have the date, the food product, the time removed from temperature control, and the time when removed from temperature control, the temperature when removed from temperature control. Those should be filled out by the sponsor kitchen. However, the discard time and the discard time can be filled out by the sponsor kitchen. The person who is discarding the product, that's typically going to be the site kitchen. And also, if for some reason there's any temperature abuse, not temperature abuse, but time abuse, in that case, let's say that it's past that 4 hours that they received the product, you can say received at 5 o'clock when it was supposed to be received at 4, and they discarded the product to correct that. Also for non-congregate meal options, for grab and go delivery to homes, if you're providing one-day meals, then you still have to have your meals labeled properly. For one-day meals, each individual container must include a label that states the meal contents, the source of food, the holding temperature, and potentially hazardous foods maintain a safe temperature at 41 or below, if frozen solid, or 135 or warmer until given to the recipient. And also re-warming instructions if necessary. You may use time as public health control for one-day meals for non-congregate meal options. But for multiple days of meals for non-congregate meal options, they do have to use time and temperature control for safety, meaning they have to keep the food on temperature, 41 or colder, frozen solid, or 135 or warmer. On the label, they have to include the meal contents, the source of food, the holding temperature, and instructions on how to hold and how to warm or prepare the food. Also, you must transport again under temperature control. All foods must be protected against cross-contamination. Packing of foods for individual meals must preserve the food at the temperature that's required. If you're cooling food, again, you only have 6 hours, 2 hours to 41, 2 hours to 70, 4 hours to 41. And it's the sponsors and the meal providers' responsibility to maintain safe food until given to the recipient. Also, delivery vehicles must be clean. Reusable containers to maintain temperatures during transportation must be smooth and easy to clean. And it's important to use dry ice sheets, or refrigerated units to achieve cold holding temperatures. We don't allow wet ice. It could cause contamination of the product. And also the duration of travel time must be considered when determining appropriate packing and temperature holding methods, as well as delivery means. Remember not to leave the doors open unnecessarily or put food in direct sun or near the exhaust of the vehicle. Also consider your weather conditions when delivering food. It's encouraged that the delivery people receive basic food safety training, and encourage them to clean their hands and when sinks are available, and when not, use hand sanitizer. Also, control measures must be in place. Logs and temperatures, log times and temperatures, and other quantifiable measures to ensure food is safe to the best of your ability. Also, you want to make sure you have corrective measures in place, and consider having a plan B in case the food is unsafe, if it's provided at the incorrect temperatures, for example, or provided at a later time if you're using time as public health control. Also consider having all your food handlers obtain a food handler card. And for those food managers, for example, consider having them take some more extensive food manager training. Also, food safety knowledge can help ensure awareness of basic food safety principles on how to ensure the safety of the children, and your sponsorship maintains a good standing. For more information on food safety, you can find that information on our website, eatsafe.la.gov. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me or Carol. And if you have any questions right now, I also may be able to take some at the end of, or right now during the presentation. I'm looking to see if we have a chat. Well, okay, I guess I can't see the chat. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, well,
if anybody has any questions, here we have a question. What is an example of a source of food?
like the approved source is, okay, so the approved source is going to be your sponsor typically. They have to be permitted for one. However, if we have a situation where you're obtaining food from your home, for example, that would not be approved source. So basically the source of where you get the food is typically you want to initially get them from food manufacturers, permitted food manufacturers with a food and drug permit, who will then deliver them most likely to your sponsor, and your sponsor will also be considered an approved source.
Are there any other questions? Alina, thank you so very much for being with us today and for that presentation. We really appreciate your time. If anybody has any other questions, they can put them in the chat and we can get them to Alina and try to get your questions answered. But for now, we're going to go ahead and switch over to the rest of the SFSP presentation. We're going to start with Shanna Leger. If you'll give me just a second. Okay, and let's see. Okay, before we really dive into the SFSP basics, we did want to provide you with a list of the regional offices for public health. These are the contacts that you can utilize if you have a specific question about permitting in your parish. So if you've talked to your local sanitarian and you're still hoping to get a couple of answers, then this may be the next step that you would go to get those questions answered. All right.
Hi, everyone. This is Shanna Leger, and I'm going to be talking about planning and administering the summer food service program. Well, first up, as far as attendees on this call today, it seems like we have kind of a large mix of different types of attendees. We have some school systems present that presently through USDA's waivers or operating the summer food service program at this time. So they're pretty familiar with all the waivers and flexibilities that we'll be discussing today. Whereas we also have some returning sponsors that are non-school system based sponsors, some of which may not have participated in the summer food service program since either summer of 2020 or possibly even summer of 2019. Therefore, some of this information may be brand new to you. So we'll try to do our best to cover it as detailed as we can while also being mindful of the time. So today we'll be discussing how to plan and administer the summer food service program, which I believe is everyone on the call knows. The summer food service program was created to bridge the gap in child nutrition when school is not in session. Children attending summer feeding sites in low-income areas are able to receive free meals during the summer. And while the program is primarily administered in the summertime, it may also provide meals for vacation breaks and emergency closures throughout the year, as well as I mentioned, in current times with the pandemic, there's flexibility that allows for the program to actually be operational during the academic school year. And also as a reminder from the CMP Zoom update that was hosted on March 4th, as well as the March 11th Summer Food Service Program webinar for school food authorities, please be reminded that CACFP at risk cannot operate with the Summer Food Service Program during the regular summer months. So essentially when the 2021 academic school year ends, so will the CACFP at-risk operations. And then you would roll over into summer food service program only. Okay, as far as eligibility requirements for participants, the SFSP provides meals to children 18 years of age and under when school's not in session, traditionally. However, individuals that are aged 19 and older with a disability may also be eligible participants. The key here is that both of these criteria that are bulleted on the slide have to be met in order for an individual 19 years of age and older to be deemed eligible to participate in the program and for you to receive reimbursement on that meal. So generally, it's kids 18 years of age and younger that are participating. However, there are some stipulations in which older children who meet both criteria may also be able to be participants. Okay, sponsor eligibility. So generally speaking, our most common sponsor types for summer food service program would be our nonprofit school food authorities or our school systems. We also have government-based sponsoring organizations that participate. We have college or universities that host summer food service programs. We also have nonprofit residential camps and sometimes also non-residential camps that participate. And then we have other private nonprofit groups such as churches and religious-based organizations. We always try to make note of the priority system that is spelled out in summer food service program federal regulations. So in accordance with 7 CFR Part 225.6B5, confusion and waste occur when 2 or more sponsors compete or target services to the same children in the same geographic area. When this occurs, the state agency will approve based on the priority system stated in the regulations as referenced on this slide, with those listed at the top having the higher priority for picking up new sites or for approval to participate, on down to new governmental agencies and new nonprofit agencies having priority but lesser of an extent. Please be reminded that all summer food service program sponsors must be approved on an annual basis in order to participate in the summer food service program. Additionally, beyond the online application, which consists of a sponsor and 1 or more facility applications, the following requirements must be met in order for approval. All sponsors must be able to demonstrate financial and administrative capability. All sponsors must remain in good standing to be eligible to participate in a new program year. So for instance, if they had been deemed seriously deficient in the past, at that point, they would have had to demonstrate to the state agency that they have a corrective action plan in place. It's been reviewed and approved by the state agency. And at that point, they would be able to participate, but we would be periodically checking in to make sure that that was still upheld. Also, termination from any other child nutrition program could certainly impact participation in the SFSP. Additionally, sponsors must agree to serve low-income children, to maintain a nonprofit food service, to provide year-round services to the community. They must be aware that they are exercising full management control over all sites under their operation. Sponsors must agree to conduct pre-operational visits for any brand new sites that they're picking up in a given summer. And of course, sponsors all have to enter into a permanent CMP agreement with the state agency for participation. And one other thing I wanted to mention on written agreements, if there are any changes to your organization as far as administratively, who is deemed the head of the organization / superintendent, or the authorized rep, which is typically our primary point of contact, we now use the CMP single permanent agreement information sheet in order for you to notify us of a revision or a change that's needed to the contact information that we have on file for your agency. So to access that, we do have it saved under the summer feeding portion of the CMP website. So without logging in from the home page, you would click on Memos Resources, then on Summer Food Service Program. Then you would click to access the forms. And this form itself is located under subheading Forms. And again, it's called the CMP Single Permanent Agreement Information Sheet. So you would provide us with anything that's changed, whether that's telephone number, email address only, or whether there's someone new that's replacing someone who was previously designated as head of the organization or authorized rep. So when planning your summer food service program, some things that sponsors must also consider from year to year is what the cost will look like in order to provide the services that are being planned, the number of sites anticipated. Another consideration is how much of that cost can be received or covered through the reimbursements that you're going to receive for meals served. How long is the program going to be operational for? So obviously a 3-week program versus a 10-week program. 10-week program would be more costly and there would be more things to factor in. What will be the average number of children fed during one day? So again, when you're first completing your application in the new year, it really is forecasting and it's a best guess, what your ADP is going to be per site. But you do want to try to do the best guess that you can based on history at that site, or just based on any type of activities or enrollment that you might possibly have at that site. And then you'll need to consider what your staffing needs are. Of course, if you are planning to produce the meals yourself, and you're going to be preparing those at maybe a large central kitchen for distribution to a multitude of sites, you would have greater staffing needs than if you had perhaps a vended model in play where you were not actually producing the meals. Other things to consider are costs that are allowable versus non-allowable for the program. So on this slide, we also have some examples of costs that would not be permitted to be paid with summer food service program reimbursements. So examples would be things like bad debts, fines or penalties, and that includes like NSF charges with bank accounts that cannot be paid with summer food service money. And then there's a variety of other examples that are provided here too. Any type of meal that does not meet the meal pattern, meals that are provided to sites that are not recognized and approved through the online application, et cetera, et cetera. All right, so now we get into the big topic, the waivers that are currently available and in effect through USDA for the summer food service program. So again, some that are listening now have a pretty good understanding of these waivers. Others may be hearing about these for the first time. So we'll just kind of go over what the categories are, mention a bit on each of them, and then I would imagine we'll probably have questions at the end or questions after the webinar is done. So the first waiver that still remains in effect and will continue to be in effect through the duration of summer feeding 2021 is the non-congregate feeding in Sfsp. So essentially that allows sponsors to provide meals to children to take to their residents. And there's a variety of different ways that this is currently being accomplished by our school systems. There is the grab and go option that is being utilized at some sites where it's essentially a curbside pickup and the meals are picked up, could be one day worth of meals, could be multiple days worth of meals. And they're accounted for on a point of service document, and then those meals are brought home to children. Another example is home delivery method. So some of our non-school system sponsors actually began to utilize that option last summer when it came available. And we have plenty of school systems that are currently using the home delivery model. So that is also an option for getting meals to children in a non-congregate setting. Remember that congregate feeding was always required for summer food service program prior to the pandemic, essentially meaning that the children had to actually consume their meals in a supervised setting on site. Another waiver that's currently in effect and will remain in effect through the summer duration is the parent and guardian meal pickup waiver. So a lot of sponsors are currently utilizing that, and we have plenty that did last summer as well. And it's optional, but if you choose to utilize it, it allows for your district or for your sponsoring organization to have parents or guardians pick up meals on behalf of children. So that is a waiver that's in effect now. We do have a prototype form that we've developed, and we've kind of based it off of some other school systems forms that they've come up with. And that should be posted on the website, the CMP website, under Summer Food Service Program forms. So that's something that you could utilize if you plan to use this waiver, or you could adapt it, incorporating all the base elements of it and maybe format it per your liking. Another waiver that remains in effect is area eligibility for closed enrolled sites. So we're going to go into the site definition shortly, but just be reminded that prior to the pandemic, USDA would allow for closed enrolled sites to utilize area eligibility, as opposed to having program operators actually have to process free and reduced meal apps on behalf of all the children that were enrolled at the closed enrolled sites. USDA did away with that flexibility and did provide some waivers in this category prior to the pandemic. However, now that the pandemic has begun, we have these blanketed waivers that would allow you, if you choose, to only serve a targeted group of children and be a closed enrolled operation. It would allow you to use area eligibility to establish free meals and not have to process free and reduced meal apps. So that's another option that remains in place. One other waiver is the first week site visit requirement for monitoring. So any sponsor that has a returning site that has not had, historically any significant issues, you will have the option to request to waive the requirement of having to do a first week monitoring visit. So again, you can opt into that waiver, and if approved by the state agency, that would give you permission to be able to skip the first week visit for your returning successful sites and only have to focus in on that first 4-week monitoring form. Meal service time flexibility is a big waiver. I think pretty much every sponsor under the sun has opted into this one. Prior to the pandemic, USDA defaulted back to what the regulations state about SFSP meal service timing, which made things pretty tight. So prior to this waiver, sponsors were having to adhere to breakfast meal service not exceeding 1 hour in length, snack meal services not exceeding 1 hour in length, and lunch and or supper not exceeding 2 hours in length. And then there was also specific timeframes that had to elapse between the start of one meal and the next. Well, right now, through use of this waiver, you can plan meal service timing and length of the meal service in accordance with what's going to work for your subset of children. So you would not be held to only 1 hour of serving for breakfast. You could exceed that under this waiver. And for instance, you would not have to have 3 hours elapse between the start of breakfast and lunch, as the regulations state. If you opt into this waiver, you could space them more closely. Offer versus serve and summer food service program. Prior to the pandemic, offer versus serve was no longer an option if following the summer food service program meal pattern. However, this is a waiver option that our non-school food authority summer sponsors can opt into, or if they choose to use offer versus serve. And then, of course, our school systems that are participating in summer food service program, if they are following national school lunch and school breakfast meal pattern, this would not even be applicable to them. The food service management contract duration waiver is really more applicable to our charter school sponsors that participate in summer food service program, and that allows them to have an additional year on their contract beyond what the original expiration was for, if needed. And then finally, the on-site monitoring requirements for SFSP is also a waiver option. So this allows you to have your monitors still conduct whichever monitoring activities are required, but they can do so in a virtual or off-site, essentially a desk audit-based capacity. So by opting into this waiver, monitors can complete their monitoring duties while never stepping foot, actually at the site itself. So these are the waiver options that are currently in effect, and we will, I believe there's a slide where we're going to go into where you opt into these. However, if there's not, just know that if you are working on your 2021 application, and for instance, maybe you're not a school system, so you're not currently operating SFSP, then you're going in to complete your 2021 application for the first time for the upcoming summer months. When you access the purple summer feeding tab, there is going to be a link on the left-hand side that says waivers, and that's where you'll need to go, and it'll be a required part of your application. So you would do your usual forms, your sponsor level and facility level applications, plus you would need to go to that waiver link and indicate if you want to opt in or opt out of all waiver options that are displayed there. So as we pretty much already mentioned, when it comes to sponsor monitoring in the summer food service program, there's basically 3 different types of visits that could be required. So remember, for your brand new sites, you're required to do a pre-op visit, and that's prior to operations at that site. A first week visit, so a visit at some point in its first week of operation, and also a first 4-week site visit, which is completed at any point in time in the first 4 weeks of operation. And we do notate on this slide too, that if you have a site that's only scheduled to operate maybe for a total of 3 weeks, that is still does not exempt you from having to do the first 4-week visit. You would just have a shorter time frame to complete it in. Additionally, there's the racial ethnic data form. So in the summer months, when we get back into traditional SFSP time, all of our sponsors will have to complete the racial ethnic data form at every operational site at some point during its operations. So you may have some sites that are going to operate the month of June only. You may have some sites that are operating in June and in July. So you would just need to plan accordingly to make sure that your monitors are completing the racial ethnic data form quicker for those sites that have an end date in June than for the sites that are going to operate through July. You just have to make sure this gets completed one time per summer per site during its operations. And then, of course, more responsibilities of sponsors would include training of your staff and attendance at state trainings, which you're doing right now, proper procurement of foods and goods for the summer food service program, preparation and completion and submission of claims for reimbursement, maintenance of documentation in support of all your claims and operations for 3 years plus the current year. We call those your source documents. Those documents that can basically retrace what you did in your operations. So you need to keep those for 3 years plus the current year. And then, of course, sponsors must complete their online sponsor and site applications annually. Okay, as far as summer food service program site types, I think there's a few slides we have coming up on different site types. There's a lot of different options as far as site types, though in Louisiana, we traditionally just see really just a handful of sites that are typically in use. So I don't want to spend too much time on all these different site types and confuse you, but we did want to at least have them on the slides to bring them to your attention. So generally speaking, open sites, restricted open sites, and closed enrolled, those are the primary types of sites that we see in summer food service program. Open sites, whether it's restricted, open, or just plain open sites, those sites are generally just going to be geared to children 18 years of age and younger. So they're essentially open to the community. Closed enrolled sites, on the other hand, are those sites that are targeted specifically for children that are reporting to the site for some type of program. So for closed enrolled, you actually need to have an enrollment roster, and your program is only going to provide food service for the kids that are enrolled to take part in that program, not additionally for community kids. The difference between the open and restricted open site type is essentially that when you're open, you may have kids on campus for a particular purpose who you plan to feed every day. But as an open site, you're open not only to feeding those kids, but you're also open to the community at large, serving any child 18 years of age and younger on a first come, first served basis until you've utilized all of your food. Whereas restricted open is you're serving children, possibly those that come to campus for a purpose. Plus, you're still going to open your program up to the community children, but you're going to have a cap on that. And it has to be due to spacing, security, safety, or control issues to be able to say, you know, we're going to feed the 50 or so kids who are here on site, plus we can only accommodate 30 or so from the community. And then when you assign that cap, if it's for one of these reasons and you have that justification, it's acceptable to have the ADP set the way that you have it set, where you have a cap on how many kids you're going to take in from the community. There's also a residential or non-residential camp designation. The main difference between that site type and the others on this slide is that with residential and non-residential camp sites, you cannot use area eligibility. So those programs are typically having to collect and process free and reduced meal applications to determine individual statuses. And then we have other site types such as NYSP sites. Several years back, we did have some smaller programs that operated these types of sites, but it's been years now since we've had NYSP summer sites. Migrant sites and homeless sites are another site type. We don't traditionally see those in Louisiana, but they could exist, certainly. And with migrant or homeless sites, you're essentially getting the migrant homeless liaison for the school district to provide you with a listing or a roster of kids that have that designation in the school system. And as long as 50% or more of the kids that are being fed from those locations meet that classification, that's how you determine those sites to be free. So they're not proven free through area eligibility or by free and reduced meal applications, but rather from a list that has been created and signed off on by the homeless or migrant liaison. And then we also have upward bound sites, and those typically are seen on our university campuses. Those kids are eligible to receive up to 3 meal types per day for upward bound, but those are very particular programs for high school kids. And the criteria to even be enrolled and participate is stringent, and that is what proves that these children are eligible for free meals, the criteria to be enrolled in these programs. Okay, one quick mention about rural versus non-rural or urban designations. So this has come into play in the past when we were concerned with whether or not transportation of children cost could be deemed as allowable or not for summer food service program. And just be reminded that transportation of meals, for instance, or mileage for a monitor who's traveling from site to site, those types of things, as long as they're built into your budget and they're tracked accordingly, they are allowable uses of SFSP money. However, transportation of children from home to site may or may not be allowable based on the designation of your site. So we have the link on here for USDA's rural designation tool, and we really have to go by what that website indicates. So if it states that your site is in a rural area, you certainly could be eligible for reimbursement, or you certainly could be eligible to use your reimbursement towards the cost of transporting kids. Whereas if you're in a major city and this link determines that your site is urban, that would not be an allowable cost of SFSP. So when determining which sites you'd like to operate under your summer food service program, there's a few different things that you want to keep in mind. Of course, administrative capability. At some point in time, you need to make a final determination on if you're at a level that's comfortable, that you can properly oversee and manage. You may wish to remain at the number of sites that you presently have, versus if you have the capability of expanding and taking on additional sites. But you need to know what your limits are, of course. If you don't have the infrastructure, the money, the staffing, the oversight to operate 20 sites, and you're currently at 10, and you're being offered sites from the community, you need to know what your cap is going to be, and at what point you say, thank you, but I can't take on any additional sites for this current program, maybe in a future year. And then you could refer them to us, and we would help find a home for that site or a sponsor that could provide the services. You also want to be aware of accessibility of sites. So if you're in an area maybe that has a really, really busy intersection, but you're also close to where a lot of children are housed, you want to make sure that the site is safe and accessible to them. So you need to make sure that site placement is good. It's in close proximity to where kids can easily access it. Meal friendliness is also very important. So you want to make sure that when you're planning your menus, that it's actually going to be things that your target population or the children may actually like to eat. Site activities are always highly encouraged. That generally is what's going to draw the kids to the site and keep them there for the meal services. Site activities are not required, but of course they are highly encouraged. And then a volunteer base, if you can link up with different volunteers that you can incorporate into your program, that's always cost saving. And then hopefully they'll return in future years to help you with your operations. Some questions to ask in terms of returning sites would be, were the sites able to meet health standards last year? So did they have everything that was required in order to pass inspection from the health department? If not, what were the issues and what needs to be done in order to bring them into compliance? Did the location pose any safety issues? Is another important consideration. And then also, was the site able to reach the number of kids that were planned? And if not, what could you possibly do this year to help promote it more so? Okay, so as I mentioned previously, I think pretty much everyone on the call is familiar with our online application and how it works. But remember that area eligibility is always the quickest way to allow for a site to be eligible to serve kids free of charge and to in turn claim all meals for reimbursement that were eligible for free reimbursement. So area eligibility data, we basically give that information to you in your online application. As you access each facility level application on page 1, you assign what type of site it's going to be, whether it's open, restricted open, or closed enrolled. And then there's going to be that drop down. I think now it's a button actually that you have to click for area eligibility, and it will give you a listing of all the schools within that service area of the address of that physical location that you're going to be serving from. And it will only list the school sites that would qualify, having 50% or greater free and reduced eligibles. So only those school sites in the list are those that would be eligible to select from in order to establish area eligibility of your summer site. So open sites, restricted open sites can always use area eligibility. And then with use of the closed enrolled waiver, you can also apply area eligibility towards your closed enrolled sites as well, and not have to use free and reduced meal applications to determine if they're otherwise eligible for free meals. So school building data, free and reduced data, census data, and community eligibility provision data are 3 ways in which area eligibility can be demonstrated. We typically use items 1 and 3 most commonly in our state. That's what we're providing to you in your online application itself. I'm not going to touch too much on this because I don't really think that we have anyone that meets this criteria right now. But just be reminded that if you have, and this is not upward bound programs, this would be other residential or non-residential programs / camps, or any closed enrolled site that's not opting into the waiver to use area eligibility, they would need to collect and process free and reduced meal applications for every enrolled child. And in order to be eligible to be a closed enrolled site, at least 50% of those children in which applications have been collected for would need to meet the criteria of free or reduced status. If they do not, the site is not eligible to be closed enrolled or to be a camp. And I basically just said what's on this slide in the bullets, so we can go forward. Okay, as far as methods for providing meals in the summer food service program, the most commonly used methods that we see would be where the sponsor themselves and their staff prepare meals on site at each location, or possibly prepare meals in 1 or more central kitchen locations, the sponsor staff, and then distributes those to other satellite operations or satellite locations. So both of those scenarios are considered self-op. Another option is to purchase vended meals. And that typically is where you're receiving maybe pre-boxed or pre-unitized meals already complete at your sites, and then your staff, your sponsoring organization staff, is actually handling the point of service and the issuance of the meals. But the meals are coming pre-prepared from a third party. And then another option also is to utilize a food service management company. As far as our school districts in this particular state, it's just the chartering group organizations that are permitted to use food service management companies. Some things to consider would be, which meal types do you plan to serve? How many meals will you be serving on a given day for your program? When are unitized meals required? And would your organization be eligible to also receive USDA foods or commodities? So self-preparation is the most common meal service model that we see amongst all of our summer food service program sponsors. When you are utilizing a self-prep model, you're generally eligible to receive slightly more reimbursement per reimbursable meal that is served. And we'll go over that shortly. There's a slide that talks about the combined reimbursement rates. And then with self-prep, of course, the sponsor themselves has maximum control over the quality of meals. If they're purchasing, they're producing the meals themselves. And then as a reminder, as Alina had mentioned in her training, All kitchens utilized for this program must meet all local and state health and safety regulations. So that's true of any kitchens that you're utilizing, that you have your staff reporting to produce meals. That's true of the kitchen where your vended meals may be coming from. That kitchen itself must be able to pass inspection and hold a current permit to operate. And that would be true if you're using a food service management company. The kitchen in which they're producing meals from must also be able to pass inspections and hold a current permit to operate. Okay, so it's the very next slide that talks about the breakout and the reimbursement rates. So every sponsoring organization is going to get the base operating cost reimbursement for any reimbursable meal that they have served, provided that there's the documentation in support of it. And then they're also going to get an administrative cost tacked on top of that base amount. So as you can see, is that purple? And the first column that says self-prep or rural sites, they're getting slightly more reimbursement, our self-prep sponsors or self-op sponsors, than our sponsors that are using vended or food service management company. So the combined rate, I don't think we have a slide on that, but you can see these breakouts. We have a memo on the website. If you just search under memos for 2021 reimbursement, I don't have the memo number right in front of me, but you'll be able to see the Sfsp 2021 reimbursement rates. And then also when you log in on the CMP website and you go under summer feeding, on the left-hand side, there should be a link called Program Administration. And you can click on reimbursement rates underneath that, and then just make sure that you have 2021 selected in the dropdown. And that will also give you the breakout of the rates. But remember that ultimately when you're filing a claim for reimbursement, the claim itself is going to show that you were paid for each meal on the combined rate. So for breakfast, that would be $2.24 plus about 22 additional cents if you're self-op versus $2.24 plus about 17 additional cents per breakfast if you're vended or using a food service management company. Okay, so if you are delivering meals in summer food service program from a central kitchen to another site, for instance, you will need to maintain a complete satellite account form for every transfer that occurs. The satellite account form is posted on the CMP website under Memos, Resources, Summer Food Service Program, Forms. And it does have instructions that accompany it. And we also do have that posted in our Sfsp forms booklet that we posted as a memo last summer. So that would be a 2020 memo. But definitely that satellite account form is posted in those two locations. So anytime that you're transporting food from one location to the next, this satellite account form needs to be completed. And there are signature blocks for the individuals that are receiving the meals at the receiving site, as well as for the driver who's actually packaging up the meals and taking them to the alternate location. This is a slide that we really don't need to focus on too much, but this just gives you, this is from the administrative guidance for Sfsp USDA book. This just gives you kind of a reference for how you can maybe determine your staffing schedule or staffing needs if you are preparing meals on site. Vended meals and meals provided by a food service management company have to be unitized meals, which means that they need to be contained as one unit. However, the vendor may separate hot and cold foods into two parts to maintain food safety. Milk and juice may be packaged separately, but still must be served with the meal. Essentially, meals are going to be packaged, delivered, and served as one unit. And only complete meals that meet all of the meal powdering requirements would be eligible for reimbursement. So this slide just kind of talks about which summer sponsored types could be eligible to receive commodities for their summer food service program through the Department of Agriculture and Forestry in Louisiana. So any of our self-prep sponsors, any sponsors that are producing their own meals should be eligible. And there's a separate application process that you would need to complete annually with LDAF. That information should still be on our website under Memos, Resources, Summer Food Service Program, Resources, maybe on page 2 or 3 if I'm remembering correctly. And I think we also have a link there to the LDAF commodities application. So our self-prep sponsors can apply and potentially receive commodities for their summer food service program. Also, sponsors that have entered into an agreement with a school or a school food authority to get meals from them at a set rate. Those individuals may also be eligible to receive commodities foods. And then this one is a long one. The third criteria is sponsors that are school food authorities that have competitively procured program meals from the same food service management company from which they are competitively procuring meals for the NSLP during the last period in which school was in session. So essentially our charter schools that are using the same food service management company in their summer operations as they did in the most recent school year, those individuals may also be eligible to receive commodities. However, note that if you are maybe a private nonprofit group or possibly university-based and you are using a food service management company, it is likely that you would not be eligible in those scenarios to receive commodities food. Okay, as far as acceptable or allowable meal combinations based on site type, our open, restricted open, and closed enrolled sites allow for sponsors to offer up to 2 meal combinations per day per site. Some sponsors elect to only offer 1 meal service per site, and that's acceptable. So you could choose to do a breakfast only, a lunch only, a supper only, or a snack only at 1 or more of your sites. However, the most common combination that we see for summer food service program is the breakfast and lunch combo at SFSP operating sites. Other allowable combinations, though, would include breakfast and supper at a site, breakfast and snack at a site, lunch and snack at a site, supper plus snack, or 2 snacks. The only combination that is not permitted is to combine lunch and supper meal service and offer those at a given site. Those 2 cannot be coupled together. I think I mentioned this earlier, but our camp, residential and non-residential sites, as well as our migrant sites, they actually do allow for the offering of up to 3 meal types per day, which most people are saying, why can't I immediately jump to that type and be able to serve and get reimbursed for 3? The trick again, and the important thing to remember is that these types of sites have to collect and process free and reduced meal applications and get individual determinations on the children. So there is that whole aspect that has to be considered if you would be thinking about a campsite. Migrant sites, however, would require communication with the migrant liaison for that local school district and to maintain an up-to-date list on all the children that are being served from that site that meet that designation. Okay, we talked on this earlier when I was referencing the different waivers that are in play. So basically everything on this slide is talking about what's required of federal regulation, the timing and the spacing of meals. But just be reminded that if you do elect and you receive approval from the state agency to use the meal service timing flexibility, you would not be required to adhere to these stipulations for summer 2021. Be reminded though, that if you do not opt into that waiver, and then you break these timing rules, that would be an issue. So if you do not elect to use the meal timing service waiver, we would expect that you would uphold all of these things on the slide at all of your sites. If you do opt into that waiver and receive approval for it, then you can basically space and time your meals in a custom way that works best for your organization. Don't really foresee that we're going to have much field trip action happening this summer, but I mean, anything's possible, as we've all definitely learned over the past year. So if there are any field trips that are scheduled where, a subset of kids are going to be taken off site and brought to the aquarium and museum, etc. If those summer food service program meals, if any meals are going to be taken off site and consumed on the field trip, we do need advance notification of that. So the same thing would apply here. If you have a field trip planned, you would need to email me at the email address on this slide and just let me know which site or which sites are going to be taking field trips, on which dates, which meal type is going to be offered to the kids once they reach their location for the field trip, and approximately how many kids you anticipate that you'll be taking for that field trip. Second, meals in the SFSP. So there are some scenarios where there may be leftover meals after the entire meal service has been closed out. So let's say, for instance, that you're serving breakfast from 8 to 9 a.m. and you're an open site. and 9 o'clock has occurred and you still have kids on site because they're there for some enrichment activity, and everyone has received a first meal. So there's no one that's been left out. You may still have some additional meals. So for instance, maybe you have 10 complete meals that are still left over on the line. We'd always encourage that you would store those for later use if you have the facilities to keep those safely cooled or stored. However, if you don't, and if they would otherwise be discarded, you can serve those meals. You can serve them as seconds to the children who wish to take seconds. There's two key elements here. To be able to claim the meal as a second, you have to still have all components present from the original meal. So you can't entirely run out of the meat that's being offered and then have the other components still on the line, but no meat alternate. If you serve those out to children, because you have nothing, no safe way to keep those for later use, you could serve them out to the kids, but they could not be claimed for reimbursement because they'd be missing one of the required components. So USDA says that sponsors should never intentionally overproduce for the purpose of serving out seconds. But in cases where you do have leftovers and you really have no safe alternative for storing those foods, you can serve them out as second meals. And you can claim some of those second meals provided that all of the components were available to the kids that came through for a second meal. And if offer versus serve is in place, that they still took a reimbursable meal with them. So in the example where I gave with 10 leftover meals, you may serve all 10 out, but you may still not be able to claim all 10 as second meals because there's a formula that USDA has established, which basically says whatever your total number of first meals was for that day that you issued out to the kids, you can claim no more than 2% of that value in the form of second meals. So if you served 100 lunches and you had 10 left over, 2% of 100 is 2 meals. So you would only be able to claim 2 out of 10 of those second meals as seconds that were claimable. We do have the website, the CMP system set up to where it knows these rules. So on the back end in your claim system, it knows what the cap is, and it's not going to let you input more second meals than what you would be eligible to claim. So as I stated previously, congregate meal service has always been a huge deal with summer food service programs. There's been other states, there's been memos about the traveling apple and different things happening in other parts of the country where maybe kids could leave with some components of their food, and that was allowable, but that was never allowed in Louisiana with the current health department and food code that we have. We're a little bit stricter in the state. So we've been preaching congregate setting meal service for many years now. However, with the pandemic, things have changed. So please be reminded that you do in summer 2021 have the option to serve non-congregate meals, provided that you have opted into that non-congregate meal service waiver and been approved by the state agency. Meal counting and claiming, as always, continues to be a huge topic. So meal counting and claiming has honestly become even more complicated than ever, with the option now to be able to do these non-congregate issuances of meals, and also with the option to be able to issue multiple days worth of meals. So with the combination of the non-congregate meal service waiver and the meal service timing waiver, sponsors are currently able to issue up to 7 days worth of reimbursable meals at a given time to families or to children. So that makes for pretty complicated points of service and for pretty complicated records to demonstrate that. So just be reminded that we always still, even under these unique circumstances, we always still need an accurate point of service. And it's essentially up to the sponsor to determine what works best for them and for their sites. So some common types of points of service that we still see would be completion of the daily meal count form. Essentially, most people call that the hash mark sheet. So that can still be utilized, and we have a couple of different versions of it that are available in the memo. I think it's 20-47 Sfsp forms booklet. We have 2 different versions of that. So we absolutely would expect that if that's how you traditionally maintain your count, that you would continue to do so using that method. Of course, some systems still use their electronic point of service, particularly the school systems. If that's what they're accustomed to using, then they tend to also continue to use that in the summer. A clicker can be used for a point of service, but caution with the clicker method. When utilizing the clicker method, you have to ensure that whoever is designated to be standing there and counting for the kids, that they are not being distracted in any kind of way, that they don't have other job duties that are pulling them away for periods of time. And ultimately, whatever that final count is that's displayed on the clicker, that needs to be transferred and documented to be kept as a source document in support of how many meals you provided. And remember that if you do serve meals to other individuals beyond just the reimbursable meals, for instance, if you serve second meals to kids, or if you serve your cafeteria workers who would be your program adults, you have to maintain those counts separate from one another. So sometimes a clicker can get tricky if you were serving first meals to kids, and then also issuing out your leftovers and serving second meals. And then if you additionally allow your cafeteria staff to get a meal free of charge, you have to be able to maintain those three, I guess, sub counts separate from one another. And that can be hard to do with a clicker. So you just have to ensure that whoever is responsible for your point of service at each of your sites, they're fully trained. They understand that that count has to be taken at the time of the meal issuance. And you can't rely solely on plate counts or attendance counts, enrollment counts in lieu of actually marking down the children as they receive a reimbursable meal or reimbursable meals plural. In terms of record keeping, this is just kind of a quick list of things that we would expect that a sponsor would have readily available should we come out for a technical assistance or for an audit. So daily meal count documentation for all sites. And again, you have some different options of what you can use there. Monitoring forms. So completed monitoring first week and or 4-week forms. And again, if you apply for the waivers that would waive the requirement to do a first week visit for your returning sites, then we would see that and we would not expect that you'd have to have that particular form completed. But as a reminder, every site, whether it's returning or not returning, in good standing or not, every site is going to have a first 4-week monitoring review completed. Whether or not you will additionally need a pre-op visit and a first week visit is dependent on whether or not it's a brand new site. If it's brand new, you will need all 3. Or if it's a returning site that is successful. So if it's a returning site that was successful in the past, you should be able to apply for one of the waiver options that would exempt you from having to do the first week. However, if it's a returning site that was not successful, that's had operational weaknesses in the past, you would be better off doing the first week and the first 4 week. That topic always tends to cause confusion, so feel free to submit questions in the chat feature if you have any on that, or to contact me after the training. Documentation of Sfsp staff training. Of course, we're always looking for that, and that is considered a source document. So we could come on site in 2021 and we could ask for your training documentation from 2019, for instance. So make sure that every staff member who's going to be working in the summer food service program, regardless if they're paid or volunteers, that they did receive the proper summer training and that you have a record of it. Payroll documentation, including timesheets, would be checked. Any lease or rental agreements as applicable. Satellite account forms for any food that's being transferred from one location to the next. Racial ethnic data forms as completed. Mileage logs as applicable. Itemized bank statements and deposit slips. Food and non-food items, invoices and receipts. Media release. And we'll talk about that, I think, in a few slides. Menus, production records, inventory records, and any and all procurement documentation in support of whatever form of procurement you utilize. Okay, I think everyone's familiar with our CMP website. So we have the homepage link provided on the slide. And then, of course, as a returning sponsor, you are familiar with the requirement to complete both a sponsor level and a facility level application prior to starting your operations every year. And remember, you'll have one facility level application present in the application per proposed feeding location. Again, the claim feature is completed via the CMP website. Login is required. Media release, we still have that option on the website. So once a sponsor has submitted their initial application, So for instance, once you complete your 2021 summer feeding application and you click submit on it, you can then go in under the forms on the left-hand side and click on letters. And that's where you'll have the media release options as well as the health inspection form option. And when you click on media release, once you've submitted your application, you can select whether you're operating open sites or closed enrolled sites. So if you were operating all open sites, you would click on the media release -open, and it would basically just pre-populate everything for you that was based on your application. It'll give a complete listing of the sites by name and address. It'll give the operational details, what days of the week you are providing services, which meal types are being offered, what the timing is. So basically, you could just plop that into a Word document, proof it, and send that off to the local paper. Please be reminded of the program requirements feature. So this really is it's not new for summer feeding. I think everyone that's listening today should be familiar with those. But just remember that anytime that you access an application for the first time in a new year, you will have to complete all 4 phases of the requirements. And requirements can be found under applications, where you would access your sponsor and facility level applications. You'll see the requirements link, and you'll have to go through all 4 phases and complete what's being requested before you can actually make any headway in your sponsor and or facility level applications. Sponsor level application, again, 1 sponsor level application per sponsoring organization. Remember that there are some fields that you cannot edit, and that would be, for example, the address component. Your physical and mailing address is what we're pulling from your permanent agreement. So you will not have access on your end to update that. To make any changes to that kind of data would require a CMP, single permanent agreement information sheet submission. There's other areas that are pre-populated, such as the bottom right, the operating days. So remember, when you're working on your sponsor application initially, you're not going to be able to complete it in full until after you've completed all associated facility level applications, because the bottom right-hand area is going to be based off of the operating calendars that you build in all of your facility level applications. And it's going to determine what your earliest start date is from any of those sites and what your latest end date is from any and all of those sites. And it will populate this information in for you. Facility level applications, essentially the same deal as your sponsor level application. Areas that you cannot edit, such as physical address, and then areas that you will need to fill in, such as designation of who your site supervisor is per location. The facility level application still has 4 pages per feeding location, and the sponsor level application still has 5 pages as it has in years past. I think at this point we can open it to questions and then turn it over to you, and then later I'll make some announcements.
Okay, does anybody have any questions that they would like to submit? Okay, I believe we answered about the pre-operational visit. So the question is, do we need to do a pre-operational visit even if we have been operating Sfsp? And the answer to that is no, you do not need to do a pre-operational visit if it's a current site that you have operated or are already operating.
It's kind of a tricky question too, because USDA just recently put out guidance that said for any sponsor that's returning that operated in 2019 but did not operate in 2020 because of conditions of the pandemic, they're still treating those sponsors as returning. So even if you last operated in 2019 and did not operate in 2020, you're still considered a returning sponsor. And so you don't have to reapply as though you were prospective new. So with that said, if these are sites that operated in 2019, then you took a break in 2020 and you're coming back in 2021 with the same sites, to me, they're still returning sites and they'd only be subject to first week and first 4 week.
Thanks, Shanna. Our next question is, will we need to complete an additional training with our staff if we've been operating Sfsp during the school year?
You probably would need to touch on how the operations are going to change in the summer months, because I would predict that they do. Most school systems that are operating now are probably operating at every single school site, whereas in the summer months, I would imagine that they're going to consolidate and serve from a fewer number of sites. I know that school food authorities are having some issue with staffing in the summer months. It doesn't seem that they're going to be able to have as much staffing readily available. So I would say that you don't have to give the full training if it's the same staff that's already been trained in SFSP. But if you have anyone that's newly coming on board, of course, they would need to be fully trained. And at a minimum, even for those that are returning, you want to make sure that you have a meeting with them where you talk about what's changing. Maybe you're operating different site types for the summer. Maybe you're going to be closed enrolled and only be serving kids who were physically on campus. So you need to make sure that they're aware of that type of change.
Okay. Next we have, it looks a little bit more like a reminder than a question, but it's a comment about if food is transported to a location and that location is not an approved site in the CNP website, then those meals are not reimbursable. So this is, I guess, more of a reminder that if there's a physical feeding location that you're using before you ever serve meals there, if you want to be reimbursed for those meals, there must be an approved application in the CNP website.
Yes, and that would even still hold true for mobile models, but mobile feeding is a little bit different than how we set up traditional. So with mobile feeding, you may have 5 or 6 stops along the way, designated locations and times where you're going to reach each of those places. And all of that can generally be tied into one facility level application, but communication has to happen, with the state agency to let us know, A, that you're doing a mobile model, B, which physical locations you're going to be stopping at throughout the course of the day and at what times. And we have to keep that on file to make sure that we have a full accounting of what your mobile feeding model is. So we don't necessarily have 5 or 6 applications based on each stop. We're able to wrap it all into one facility app. But that would be an example of where we still do have a facility app on file. It's just in those unique scenarios of mobile feeding where you have multi-stops, it may all be tied under one application. So that would be kind of the only exception, but it's really not an exception anyway.
All right, then the next question I think is going to have 2 answers, Shanna. When will the application be available? And what is the time frame for the application?
So that was actually, that was one of my announcements I was going to make a little bit later, but I wasn't planning on getting on this quickly. But actually yesterday I had a little bit time and I decided to start testing the website. And so everyone who's on the call right now as a returning sponsor, you should, as of yesterday afternoon, be able to log in on the CNP website and access your 2021 Summer Food Service Program application. So I gave access to everyone that I was anticipating as returning from 2019 or from 2020 yesterday afternoon. And as far as timeline for submission, the regs state that every annual application must be received on or before June 15th. However, most organizations are already operating at that time. So our general rule of thumb is to please have your initial application submitted for processing and for approval at least 2 weeks prior to your start date. If you can give us 3 weeks prior, that's beautiful. That's even better because we have a first level person that it gets designated to that proofs it, contacts you if they have questions. And then it gets passed on to a second level state agency reviewer, and then ultimately to our director for final approval. So we get inundated at certain times of the year with many, many applications coming through at once. So that's why we ask, please give us at least 2 weeks lead time.
The next question is, can you do congregate feeding and grab and go together at the same time?
At the same time?
At the same site?
Okay, yes.
At the same site.
Yes, and we had a lot of that happen last summer, and we still currently have a lot of that happening with our school districts. So what we generally ask is, for everyone that's listening, please let sponsor comments become your friend this year in the online SFSP application. So on page 2 of your facility app, essentially you would just tell us what you're doing for the on-site meal consumption. So your start and end time for breakfast, your start and end time for lunch would be pertaining to the serving times on campus for the kids that are going to eat there. And then the sponsor comments would come into play where you would give us the details of your grab and go. So maybe on Mondays only, you are doing grab and go and you're issuing 5 days worth of breakfast and lunches on Monday. You would tell us, details about that in the sponsor comments. However, when you give us your ADPs for that site, you'll want to make sure that you're making that large enough to account for not only the kids that are eating on campus, but also the ones that'll be coming through and taking meals back with them.
The next question, is OVS an option in SFSP?
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Yes and no. So yes, it is an option with the SFSP meal pattern if you opt into that waiver and receive state agency approval to use it. However, there are instances where it's really not able to be used. So for instance, if you're doing like a curbside grab and go, especially if parents are coming through to pick up on behalf of kids, you can't use offer versus serve in those scenarios. So you could elect to have offer versus serve as an option for the kids that are maybe coming through the cafeteria, because they can then decline what they wish to decline. But in the grab and go type of setup, for efficiency and speed, and also considering the fact that you might have parents coming on behalf of kids, you really need to give the full meal with all components.
The next question is specific to SFAs. So the question is, what is the time period for the application? So SFSP runs from January 1st through December 31st. And so if you are an SFA that's currently operating, you need to make revisions unless you have a new site that you're adding. However, for everyone else, you're going to be doing possibly doing new revisions if you're a private nonprofit or a returning governmental agency. The next question is, are we required to offer meal pickup if we're currently doing it this school year? And the answer to that would be no. Your summer operations can look different than your current
Right.
school year operations.
Especially if you're doing summer operations. I know some school systems are only planning to operate for 4 weeks or so beyond the close of their school year. And some have told me that they're just going to do closed enrolled. They're going to have kids on campus for whatever programs they're hosting, and they want to only feed those kids. So there'd be no need for grab and go in that scenario because they're not targeting anyone other than the kids that are on campus.
Okay. We're going to do a few more announcements, but we'll go ahead and do the meal pattern portion. That will be followed by procurement. And then lastly, we'll finish out with civil rights. So to respect your time, we'll keep going with meal pattern. All right. So before we take a look at the meal pattern requirements for each meal type, let's take a look at the food components used to make up each meal pattern. In the summer food service program, there are 4 meal components. There's milk, there's bread grains, there's vegetables and or fruit, and then there's meat and meat alternates. Each meal requires a specific amount of the components to make up the meal pattern. So let's first take a look at the milk component. As you can see on this screen, milk is required in an 8-ounce portion size, and it must be pasteurized fluid and enriched with vitamin A and vitamin D. In the summer food service program, any fat content can be provided, as well as it can be flavored or non-flavored. Freezing extra milk to use later in this meal service is not allowed. And unlike the NSLP or breakfast program meal pattern, milk varieties are not required. You can offer simply one type of milk. And if jugs of milk are being utilized, you want to make sure that your cup size is large enough to hold a full 8 ounces of milk. So if you're using an 8-ounce cup and you're trying to fit 8 ounces of milk in it, it will spill everywhere. So you need maybe a 9-ounce cup or a 10-ounce cup in order to prevent spillage. Non-creditable milk items include half and half, ice cream, pudding, custards, non-fat dry milk, cheese, yogurt, evaporated milk, imitation milk, cream soup, sour cream, commercial milkshakes, powdered cocoa mixes, etc. And as a reminder, milk is a required component for breakfast, lunch, and supper, but it's optional for snack. All right, next we'll talk about bread grain. Under the SFSP meal pattern, each bread grain serving must contain a minimum of 14.75 grams of enriched or whole grain meal or flour, bran, and or germ. The minimum quantities to be offered for bread grains vary depending on the specific type of bread grain being offered. That's why it's important to refer to the bread grain chart, which we're going to show here in a minute. Non-creditable grain items include tapioca pudding, potatoes, and potato chips. Also, coffee cakes, sweet rolls, and donuts made with whole grain or enriched flour can be used as a bread component for bread or for snacks only. Okay, and here you can see the bread grain chart that we're talking about, even though it's a little bit hard to see. The bread grains are divided into 9 different groups, groups A, B, C, D. Notice that the minimum serving size column, which is the last column to the right, is the grain chart that should be used for SFSP. We use ounce equivalents in school food service programs. And here's the rest of that chart that we were just talking about, groups E, F, G, H, and I. All right, next we'll talk about fruits and vegetables. Another thing to remind you of is that in the summer food service program, fruits and vegetables are considered one component. As you probably know, they're broken out in National School Lunch, but in SFSP, it's one component. But a combination of 2 or more different vegetables or fruits must be offered for lunch and supper, and the total serving size for those must be at least 3/4 of a cup. Also, during lunch and supper, no more than half of the total requirements may be met with full strength 100% juice. 1/8 of a cup of fruit or vegetable is the smallest creditable amount in SFSP. The fruits and vegetables, they can be fresh, cooked, canned, frozen, dried, or 100% full strength juice. Beans and peas can be counted as a meat alternate or as a vegetable. However, they cannot be counted as both in one meal. Non-creditable fruit and vegetable items include fruit flavored gelatin, fruit sherbet, artificial fruit beverages, fruit bread, pickle relish, potato chips, ketchup, and fruit jams or jellies. And as a reminder, 2 forms of the same fruit or vegetable can't be served in the same meal. So for example, you can't serve both a fresh orange and orange juice, or a fresh apple and apple juice. All right, next we have the meat alternate component, and it must be provided for lunch and supper meals, but it's optional at breakfast. 2 ounces of editable meat alternate must be provided, and it cannot include the weight of bones. Allowable meat alternate products include beef, fish, poultry, eggs, dry beans and peas, nuts and seeds, and commercially produced yogurt if it's in the correct quantities. Sponsors must have the manufacturer documentation. This is so important. You need either a CN label or a product formulation statement when using commercially prepared combination foods such as pizza or chicken nuggets. This means if you go to your local grocery store and you pull some chicken nuggets off the shelf, some frozen chicken nuggets off the shelf, they may not be creditable if they don't have a CN label or a product formulation statement. Non-creditable items include bacon, liverwurst, imitation seafood, ham hocks, neck bones, beef jerky, imitation cheese, cheese products, cream cheese, frozen or homemade yogurt, tofu, and coconut. Okay, so now we'll get into the actual meal patterns. The purpose of the meal pattern is to ensure that a well-balanced, nutritious meal is offered to children. Think of the meal pattern as the collection of components that are specific to each meal type. Each meal type also requires a specific quantity of components for each meal type. All SFSP sponsors are required to meet the minimum meal pattern requirements to be considered a reimbursable meal. SFA sponsors have the option to utilize the SFSP meal pattern or the NSLP SBP meal pattern, but only SFAs or school food authorities have that option. Everyone else needs to use the SFSP meal pattern that we're discussing here. For breakfast to be considered reimbursable, it has to contain the following. It has to have 1 cup of milk, 1/2 of a cup of a vegetable or fruit or full strength juice, and 1 serving of bread grain. For lunch and supper, all 4 components must be offered within a total of 5 items. For lunch and supper, at least 1 cup of milk, 3/4 cup of vegetable or fruit in 2 different choices, and 1 serving of bread grain and 2 ounces of meat alternate is required. For snacks to be considered reimbursable, they must provide at least 2 of the 4 components in these amounts. 3/4 cup of vegetable or fruit, or 6 ounces of 100% juice. This is a little bit different. It's 6 ounces of juice. 1 serving of bread grain, 1 ounce of meat alternate, or 1 cup of milk. Also, 2 beverages can't be served as a reimbursable snack. So for example, you can't serve a cup of milk and 6 ounces of fruit juice as a snack. Sponsors may use an alternate meal pattern to accommodate children younger than 6 years of age when they're able to ensure that the right quantity is served to the right age group. So sponsors can use the Child and Adult Care Food Program or the CACFP meal pattern portion sizes for that age group. As a reminder, when utilizing the SFSP meal pattern, the minimum requirements can be exceeded because there's no maximum limit. Okay, now let's discuss adult meals in the SFSP. At the sponsor's discretion, meals may be served to persons other than eligible children, such as to program adults and non-program adults. However, adults may only be served after all participating children have been offered a reimbursable meal. The definition of a program adult is a staff member that's directly involved with the preparation or serving of a meal. A program adult may receive a meal free of charge, but a non-program adult is any adult that is not directly related to meal preparation or serving. Non-program adults must pay for meals. The determined cost of the adult meal has to be the cost to produce the meal or higher, and it may not be less than the cost to produce the meal. Adult meals are never reimbursable, so these meals should be recorded separately from the reimbursable meals provided to children. And lastly, any money collected for the sale of SFSP meals must be deposited into the SFSP nonprofit account. Sponsors should clearly convey to their site staff whether the non-program adult meals will be sold at their site, and if they are sold, what is the process for collecting and depositing those funds. All right, and a little bit more on offer versus serve, which we just discussed a little bit ago. But offer versus serve, or OVS, allows your participants to decline some of the food offered in a reimbursable meal. Offer versus serve is not mandated. It's just one of the options that you have, especially through the waiver. OVS can help reduce food waste, and it can contain costs at a site. If implementing OVS at breakfast, 4 food items must be offered. The 4th food item can be from any of the meal components, and a child can only decline 1 food item. If implementing OVS at lunch or supper, a child can decline up to 2 food items, and they can choose to decline any of the items. It's very important that site staff are adequately trained in OVS. This is a very common finding on reviews or on technical assistance visits. As a reminder, program integrity must be maintained, and all participating children must be offered all required meal components as indicated in the SFSP meal pattern. So running out of a food component doesn't mean you're utilizing offer versus serve. All food components must be available for the entire length of the meal service. Okay, here is a list of resources for you. And we're going to go ahead and go right into procurement with Babette.
Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about procurement. However, if you've attended the formal training and plan on doing the micro and small purchase training, it's basically the same information. So just wanting to let you know. Summer food service sponsors can't just simply go to the store and purchase their food and supplies for their program. They also just can't decide which food distributor they want to use because they like one better than the other. Every dollar spent of the federal government's money must be procured. So sponsors need to make sure they understand and comply with all local, state, and federal procurement guidelines to make sure that the federal dollars are spent legally and wisely. The basis of procurement in the summer food service program is that you want the distributors to compete for your business. Obviously, you as the sponsor want to get the lowest price possible for quality goods and services. The full and open standard of competition was established because of the strong belief that the procurement process should be open to all qualified contractors who want to do business with the federal government. Fairness and integrity encourages vendors to compete. Vendors don't want to compete when the process isn't fair and doesn't promote integrity. The more players there are in the market, the more competition that exists, and this drives costs lower and provides higher quality. If vendors know others are competing for your business, they're going to provide you the best price possible. The procurement process is a multi-step process for obtaining the best goods and service at the best possible price. These steps are part of administering the contract. Effective contract administration ensures that the SFA's procurement procedures are well thought out, reflect what they need, completed in compliance with regulations, and are managed properly at the contract award level. The steps in this process include planning your procurement, forecasting your needs, choosing your appropriate procurement method, developing your solicitation, advertising the procurement, evaluating the proposals, awarding the contract, then making the purchases and managing the resultant contract. And you must maintain documentation of that entire process. So you can see that the procurement process is really not just the solicitation and awarding of a contract. Awarding a contract is really just the beginning. The work really begins once the contract is awarded, and that's what's known as contract management. Each SFSP sponsor must have documented procurement procedures to ensure that free and open competition occurs. And we have a sample procurement plan that is available that you can use, and you can detail how you choose as long as you're following the regulations. You want to make sure that your procurement process is open and transparent, and that the sponsor has the ability to compare procurements. The sponsor must maintain the procurement plan and records of all procurement documents on site so that the state agency and or USDA can review. You should all be familiar with the code of conduct. The code of conduct form can be found on the nutrition program website, and it's required for all summer food service program sponsors. For a cost to be allowable under the summer food service program, the purchase has to be necessary to operate the program. The purchase must contribute to providing a reimbursable meal to an eligible child. The cost has to be reasonable, and it must be assigned to the activity that benefits from the cost. In other words, purchases that were made for the summer food service program cannot be used in the CACFP program. The cost must be treated consistently across all programs. If the purchase of a freezer benefits both CACFP and SFSP, the cost has to be shared by both programs. If a cost benefits more than just the child nutrition programs, then it must only bear a portion of the cost. For example, If a central air conditioning system is purchased for the building that houses both the cafeteria and the kitchen, but it also has numerous other classrooms, the child nutrition program can only pay a percentage of that cost. Ask the following question before making the decision to procure products and services. How does this cost contribute to your objective? Is the cost recognized as ordinary and necessary? Can your program be carried out without this cost? Would a taxpayer find the cost reasonable? And can the sponsor defend this purchase to the state agency, the media, and auditors? Some allowable costs are compensation of employees and their fringe benefits, cost of material and supplies, memberships, subscriptions, professional activity costs, conferences where the primary purpose is disseminating technical information and is necessary and reasonable for successful performance of your program. Remember that the USDA and or the state agency will determine what costs are allowable and will determine if the purchase is considered necessary and reasonable. If in doubt, please feel free to call us. Sheena touched on this earlier, but there are numerous unallowable costs. Things like promotion, lobbying, public relations, bad debts, depreciation, donations, purchase of equipment and vehicles, the purchase of non-creditable food items, excessive administrative salaries, labor expenses for staff that have not been approved by the state agency through the online application system. I want to stress that because if the state agency employee comes to your organization and you've got staff that you are paying, but you have not included them and received approval from the state agency on that site application where you change staff, then the expense for paying them is an unallowable cost. So you always want to make sure that you, as soon as you hire those people and get their names and information, that you put them on your site application so that you're not being charged against an unallowable cost. If you have an audit, but you're not required by the state agency to have an audit, that is an unallowable cost. Any non-prorated expenses, any rent for sites, late fees, insufficient fund fees, payment on loans, meals for day travel. If the purchase is going to exceed the life of the program, for instance, a vehicle, then the cost is an unallowable cost. This slide demonstrates how the value of the procurement corresponds to the procurement thresholds. The small purchase threshold is $30,000. So when the value of the purchase is estimated at less than or equal to $30,000, informal methods, either a micro purchase or a small purchase, can be used. If the value of the purchase is estimated to be greater than $30,000, formal procedures, including sealed bids and competitive proposals, apply. The micro purchase method does not require competition. However, purchases must be equitably distributed. The aggregate cost must not exceed $10,000, and the price must be reasonable and the purchases necessary. If you have small purchases between $10,000, but they're less than $30,000, it does require some competition. This means that you're going to have to get some quotes for the products from at least 3 different vendors. The vendor with the lowest cost would be chosen. The last procurement method is what we refer to as formal procedures. These would be sealed bids or competitive proposals that require public advertising and are more rigorous. All procurement procedures require documentation of how the solicitation was conducted, the responses received, how responses were evaluated, how the proposal was awarded, and how you monitored the contract. Sponsors must complete a cost price analysis in connection with every procurement, because this is what helps you in determining what method of procurement you have to use. You can use prior year cost records. And if you were under the $30,000 threshold last year, but you are expanding the program, you very well may need to do a formal procurement. The sponsor is responsible for ensuring that the proper method is being used, and any purchase that was not procured properly is an unallowable expense, and the sponsor will be responsible for paying for the product or service themselves. Summer food service funds cannot be used to pay for any unallowable expense. So under the formal procurement method, we would either do an IFB, invitation for bid, or an RFP, a request for proposal. When you're doing a request for a proposal, that's when you're going to use weighted award criteria, and price must always carry the highest weight. If you're using an invitation for bid, price is the only factor. So it's going to be awarded to the vendor that meets the bid requirements and is the lowest in cost. And most food and supply bids are done using an IFB because price is the most important factor. All formal procurements must be advertised twice in a regional news source, with the first advertisement being at least 15 days before the bid opening. The newspaper of a large city would be the most appropriate newspaper to advertise. Your small local, small town newspaper is not the appropriate place because you are not advertising widely enough where vendors would respond. You can also, in addition to advertising, you can send the advertisement or the bid documents by mail or by email to any known prospective vendors. The advertisement has to contain a general description of the items to be purchased, the deadline for submitting questions, the date that written responses will be provided, the date of the pre-bid meeting, and if attendance is required. A pre-bid meeting isn't required, but if you plan to have a pre-bid meeting, it should be included in the advertisement. You must include a deadline for submitting proposals, both the date and the time. The address where the solicitation could be obtained has to be included in the advertisement. And as always, with any information provided to the public, the USDA non-discrimination short statement has to be included. You don't have to include the entire long statement. I'm not going to read these, but just keep them. This is all required documents that are required to be in your bid. So you must include all of these when you are doing a bid. Excuse me. Okay, these are the required provisions in any formal procurement that you are planning. You have to have all of these USDA required provisions in your formal bid. And make sure that you have all of the civil rights laws. A lot of times you won't see them listed in a list like this, but it's a paragraph of all of the different civil rights laws. Just make sure that they're all found in your bid documents, and you can find them in the sample procurement plan. And we will be coming out with a new sample procurement plan with just a few minor updates in a few days. Let's talk a bit about geographic preference, because it's not allowed in formal procurements except when you're purchasing locally grown or raised unprocessed agricultural products. Geographic preference can be used as an additional scoring criteria to provide preference points for the purchase of locally grown or raised agricultural products. So if you are participating in the summer food service program, you can apply a geographic preference when you are procuring unprocessed, locally grown or locally raised agricultural products. When you're using the geographic preference to procure those products, the sponsor has the discretion to determine the local area to which the geographic preference option will be applied. Except for charter schools, the threshold for small purchase threshold is $30,000. You also need to know that if you have a local small purchase threshold of less than $30,000, you will use that small purchase threshold instead of the state small purchase threshold. This method is commonly known as obtaining quotes, but you still must have written specifications and provide those to each one of the vendors because you want to make sure that you're providing clear and accurate descriptions of all products and technical requirements. Price quotes have to be obtained from at least 3 responsible and responsive vendors. And of course, you must document all quotes and maintain them on file. When you're awarding a small purchase procurement, you should award to the most responsible and responsive vendor that has the lowest costs. And responsive means that the vendor submitted a bid that conforms to all of your specifications in terms of your contract. Responsible means that the vendor is capable of performing successfully under the terms of the contract. All procedures used in a small purchase procurement has to be documented and maintained on file. The micro purchase method is typically used for emergency type purchases only. It's used to purchase supplies or services where the dollar amount of the purchase does not exceed $10,000. To the extent practicable, the SFA must distribute micro purchase equitably amongst qualified suppliers. For example, if you go to Walmart for an emergency purchase of food needed to serve the meal, the next time you have to do an emergency purchase for a food item, you need to choose another grocery store. Micro purchases may be awarded without obtaining quotes if the sponsor considers the price to be reasonable. The micro purchase method is not to be used in order to circumvent free and open competition. In other words, it can't be used so you don't have to obtain quotes or do a formal bid. If you are purchasing food utilizing the micro purchase method over and over again, you are using the wrong procurement method. You should be using either the small procurement method or the formal method. A non-competitive procurement is used if items are only available from a single source, when the award of a contract is not feasible under small purchase, sealed bid, or competitive negotiation. Prior state agency approval is required for any non-competitive proposals. And here's some resources that can help you in the procurement process, and certainly feel free to call the state agency.
So right now, we're going to open it up to any questions about procurement for Babette. We have a really good point that somebody submitted about the meal pattern section, and they were kind of asking, so if half of the fruit or vegetable component can be juice, if you serve half a cup of juice, let's say you serve half a cup of juice at lunch, you would need to serve at least 1/2 of a cup of another fruit or vegetable. So even though the quantity is 3/4 of a cup total, if you serve half of a cup of juice, you would need to serve half of a cup of fruit or vegetable alongside it to meet that fruit vegetable requirement.
And it could not be in the same form. So you could
Right.
do apple juice plus half a cup of sliced apples, but you could do half a cup of 100% apple juice and half a cup of orange.
Right. Okay. So if anybody has any procurement questions, we have one, and it was asking if giving staff raises can be an allowable cost using SFSP funds.
I think we'll really have to research that. We've had some questions that have been posed about additional salaries or additional money that's going to be provided to SFSP workers, kind of as an incentive for school system workers to continue working in the summer months. In those cases, it seemed like that additional $2 per hour or whatever the amount was going to be coming from the general fund. So essentially it was going to be like a 3/4 split between SFSP funded salary and 1/4 coming from general fund. And in those cases, I gave specific instruction on how to report that in the staffing plan, because that would require 2 entries per staff member to break it out. But as far as increases in pay from prior summer to now, or from 2019 to now, solely on account of it being the pandemic, out of entirely SFSP funded means, I would have to research that a little bit more.
Well, if there aren't any other questions about procurement, Shanna has a few announcements to make before we go into our final section.
Okay, so just a few things that I thought about that I did want to make mention of on today's call, and you guys will be the first ones hearing most of this. As far as the 2021 Summer Food Service Program review schedule, that has just been drafted, and it's pretty close to being final. Who's going to be earmarked to receive a 2021 Summer Food Service Program review. It's being proofed right now, and I would expect that we'll have it posted to the website, to the CMP website, probably in the next week or two. The dates of the actual reviews themselves are not going to be furnished. We'll just have the lineup of who is earmarked to receive a review. And we also do plan to have a webinar that's going to be targeted to those individuals who are actually on the review scheduled to receive a 2021 summer review. So we haven't announced that webinar yet, but we are tentatively planning to do it May 25th. And once we finalize everything, have the review schedule finalized, which should be very soon, we're going to draft a memo that provides all the details about this May 25th webinar, and that we'll send it out. And then we'll also email and target those school systems and those non-school system summer sponsors who will be up for review, just to make sure y'all are aware of this webinar and that you're going to have the opportunity to get this prep for your summer feeding review, and also the opportunity to ask some questions. And additionally, we'll go over the review instruments that'll be used during the reviews themselves to help make sure that you're all prepared and ready for your summer's review. We also have CNR staff present on this webinar. So those that work with Summer Food Service Program and those who will be leading a lot of these summer feeding reviews this coming summer. They are present on today's webinar, and they'll also be present on the May 25th webinar that we're going to have specifically with those sponsors that are going to be up for review. So what we do know at this time is that the bulk of the summer feeding reviews will be led by CN resource staff. We believe they're going to not occur until the month of July, and that they're all going to be desk-based audits. So they won't necessarily have to report to the central office or to any of the sites that have been targeted for the review, but things like Zoom or FaceTime or something along those lines may have to be utilized so that they can actually still see production at the location selected. But of course, all those details, and as far as what's going to need to be submitted prior to the date of the review, and who your point of contact is, all that good stuff will be coming in the next few weeks. Another thing that I wanted to mention too, because it seems like we had some questions from school food authorities that are currently operating summer food service program who plan to continue to do so in the summer months. So I've talked to a few different SFAs about revising their applications, and some of them are ready to actually start doing that now to revise the school sites where they do plan to have June and July operations, to start setting up the calendars for that and to start listing the staff that they know they're going to have earmarked for those locations. So we've really never had this scenario before where school systems have an application that's already approved and on file, and they're having to revise it now to incorporate summertime, summer month activities. So this is very outside the norm. And so I'm going to try to develop some guidance and some tips and reminders to help you you SFAs that are going to need to go in and revise your application to extend operations into June and possibly into July. So I'm hoping to have a memo drafted and posted by the end of this week. That's going to give some tips and some pointers on what to do with staffing. Obviously, you still need to keep your staffing in place for the sites that they did serve at from January through May. Even if there's going to be a new site supervisor assigned for the summer months, you would not delete that history because that's all still tied to program 2021 program year. So I'm hoping to have that posted by the end of the week. Another thing that I wanted to remind everyone of too is that anyone who's going in to complete a 2021 application that is not currently operating summer feeding, when you go in to access your sponsor app and your facility apps, you're going to have that build calendar feature. So you'll actually be able to go into page 2 of each facility, assign the meal types and put in all your details of starting and ending time and ADP. And then you'll be able to build your calendars by stating the first operating day, the last operating day, and then selecting the days of the week. So that'll be done pretty quickly from your end. The opposite case of the SFAs that are currently operating who need to go in and revise and then extend their calendars, in that scenario, they will not have the build calendar feature. It will be disabled. So if you're a school system and you're in the process of revising your summer application to extend operations at one or more sites into June and or July, email me and let me know what those additional dates of operation are that you need to have placed in the application. Because I can probably help you with populating that in using a tool that's available to state staff much quicker than you would be able to do it by clicking edit and then pointing and clicking to highlight each day individually, one calendar at a time, one site at a time. So I can assist with basically mass assignment of calendars. So if you have multiple sites that you're trying to revise and extend the dates for, please email me, tell me the names of the sites, the dates of operation that you need added. I can do it from my end, have you proof it before you ever submit it. But anybody that's going in to do a 2021 application initially, not currently operating, you should be able to have that build calendar feature where you can set up your calendars much quicker than someone having to revise at this point. And then we did mention the JOT form. We used to have that site information sheet that we would get you to complete and then email or scan or fax to us if you were trying to tell us about a brand new site location. A couple summers ago, we switched over to the electronic JOT form to notify us of any brand new sites that you're going to be bringing on board. So just remember the JOT form is still in play. Like I said earlier, everyone should have access to the 2021 Summer Food Service Program online application at this point, inclusive of our non-school food authority returning sponsors. So when you go under there and you look at your facility applications, if you see any that did not roll over, possibly because you haven't operated them for a couple of years, or possibly just because they're brand new and we don't know about them yet, make sure that you submit a JOT form about that site so that we get notification that it needs to be added into the system. The JOT form link is still available on the homepage of the CMP website. So if you go without logging in, if you go to the right of the login box, you'll see helpful links grouped, and then you'll scroll all the way to the bottom to the Summer Food Service Program subsection, and you'll see JOT form for new sites. So you click on that, complete everything that's requested there, submit it, and then we will get email notifications on this brand new site proposals that you have. I think that's the updates that I have for now.
Okay. So one other update or announcement, the evaluation for this course can be found by going to the Louisiana Fit Kids website. So when you go to the calendar feature, just like when you registered, if you click on today's date, when you click on April 13th, you will be able, there will be a pop-up and you'll be able to click on evaluation. And it's very brief. It'll take you maybe about 2 minutes to complete it. And then that gives us proof of your attendance for this. And we will be able to send you a confirmation email in about a week. It'll stay open for about a week, but I would encourage you to do it today if you have time. So that'll be available right after this. The last section that we're covering is going to be civil rights. Civil rights is a required training annually for all staff. Some of you, if you are an SFA, if you participated in the last SFSP training or you listened in on March 30th, this is the same training. But if you have not yet participated, this is a training that is required annually. And we've made some updates to the training based off of a civil rights management evaluation that we've had with USDA. So there is new information in here that's really important. So we'll go ahead and get started on this. The purpose of the civil rights training is to inform, educate, and support all staff that interact with child nutrition programs, including the SFSP. This training will cover USDA civil rights requirements, staff responsibilities, and resources and information available to assist staff in carrying out their civil rights responsibilities. Discrimination is defined as different treatment, which makes a distinction of one person or group, either intentionally by neglect or by actions or lack of actions based on the protected classes. Some examples of discrimination include giving one group or type of participants larger or extra helpings of food. This could be something like giving boys an extra scoop of food. This could be separating genders, having boys sitting at one table and girls sitting at another table. Failing to provide children with a dietary disability accommodating meals. This could be something like a food allergy, or failing to provide program information to all potential program applicants. We're going to be talking a lot about protected classes in this presentation. The protected classes are the classes that USDA say that discrimination would pertain to. So the protected classes that we're specifically looking at in terms of child nutrition programs are race, age, color, sex, national origin, or disability. So you're going to see that repeated throughout the remainder of this presentation. Civil rights training is required annually for all staff. This includes full-time staff, part-time staff, temporary staff, central office and site staff, and volunteers. So even if you've been operating, if you're an SFA that's been operating SFSP for a while now, but you start your summer food service program after school ends and you've got anybody new, you've got new volunteers, you've got new temporary or part-time staff, each of those staff members must be trained in civil rights. Documentation for civil rights training must be maintained for 3 years plus the current year. Documentation must include sign-in sheets, agendas, the dates and times of training, and a sample of the training used. This could be something like the first 3 slides of the PowerPoint. Civil rights training subject matter must include each of the following areas: the collection and use of data, effective public notification systems, complaint procedures, compliance review techniques, resolution of noncompliance, requirements for accommodation of persons with disabilities, requirements for language assistance, conflict resolution, and customer service. Racial and ethnic data is used to determine how effectively a program is reaching potentially eligible children and where outreach may be needed. All SFSP sponsors must have a system to collect the racial and ethnic data of program participants in accordance with FNS Instruction 113-1. This data is used to determine the state's compliance with federal civil rights laws. USDA regulations state that respect for individual dignity should guide the process and methods for collecting data on race and ethnicity. Therefore, self-identification or self-reporting is the preferred method of obtaining characteristic data. The collection of this information is strictly for statistical reporting requirements and has no effect on the determination of eligibility to receive program benefits. This data must be maintained in a confidential file for 3 years plus the current year. And this information should be restricted to authorized school personnel and other authorized state and federal personnel when requested. All SFSP sponsors are required to complete a site racial and ethnic data form at each SFSP site at least once annually. The racial and ethnic form can be found in the SFSP form book on the CMP website. The link is provided later in this training. As a reminder, only one ethnic category is assigned per person, but multiple race categories can be selected if needed. Ethnicity is broken down into two categories: Hispanic or Latino, and non-Hispanic or non-Latino. The racial categories include American Indian or Alaska Native, Asian, Black, or African American, Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, and white. A person may identify as belonging to multiple racial categories. All FNS assistance programs must include a public notification system. The purpose of public notification is to inform applicants, participants, and eligible persons of the program availability, program rights and responsibilities, the policy of non-discrimination, and the procedure for filing a complaint. Through public outreach, sponsors are trying to ensure program access to as many potential participants as possible. Public notification must include information regarding eligibility, benefits and services, program availability with hours and locations, applicant rights and responsibilities, procedures for filing a complaint, non-discrimination policies, and any program changes. Sponsors must notify the public annually of their participation in the program. Notification to applicants and participants must include information regarding program availability, program rights and responsibilities, the procedure for filing a complaint, and the policy of non-discrimination. The public notification system must include the following elements: the public release. Sponsors must take specific actions to inform the public of their program rights and responsibilities, as well as the steps necessary for participation in the program. Sponsors must display the And Justice for All poster. Schools must display the And Justice for All poster in the correct size, which is 11 inches by 17 inches. It must be in a prominent location where it's visible to all participants in the program. The poster provides the USDA address and phone numbers that the public can use to file a complaint if they think that their civil rights have been violated. Applicants and participants must be advised of their right to file a discrimination complaint, of how to file the complaint, and of the complaint procedures. The non-discrimination statement. All informational materials, including websites used by schools to inform the public about FNS programs, must contain the non-discrimination statement. Public notification can include methods such as internet and computer-based applications, newspaper, radio or television, letters, leaflets or brochures, and bulletins. Be sure to convey a message of equal opportunity in photos and other graphics that are used to promote program information to applicants and participants. All sponsors must prominently display the USDA non-discrimination poster and Justice for All at sites where participants receive meals. It should be easily visible to the public in the food service area. If you're in need of an And Justice for All poster for a specific location, please contact Child Nutrition Programs at la.gov and we can help get one of those out to you. The USDA non-discrimination statement must be included on all forms of communication and program materials, including all materials for public information, education, or distribution that mentions USDA programs. The long version of the non-discrimination statement is required on all documents longer than 1 page or 1 sheet of paper front and back. The long version of the non-discrimination statement should also be used whenever possible or where space permits. It must always be used in instances where there's any kind of benefit issuance. So if participants are submitting information about their benefit issuance, such as like an application, then the long version must be used. The short version of the non-discrimination statement can be used if the document is too small and space is limited, such as on menus or nutrition flyers. If using the short version of the non-discrimination statement, a 9-point font is required. So here is the long version of the non-discrimination statement. And here it is in Spanish. Customer service is defined as effectively communicating with customers, responding to the customer's needs, valuing the customer's worth, and instilling excellence through courtesy, confidence, and enthusiasm. Treating customers with respect and dignity through excellent customer service saves you time and minimizes opportunities for complaints and angry customers. All children must be allowed equal opportunities to participate in the child nutrition programs, regardless of race, color, national origin, sex, age, or disability. All participants of the child nutrition programs must be treated equitably. In order to reduce the risk of a civil rights discrimination complaint, ask yourself the following questions each time a participant comes to your program for services. Number 1, am I treating this person in the same manner that I treat others? Number 2, have I given this person the opportunity to ask questions? And number 3, have I provided the person with the information that he or she needs to make necessary decisions? In no way is a sponsor to impede with a customer's right to file a civil rights complaint. However, most conflicts are easily resolved by using appropriate tools. Conflict resolution consists of useful skills to assist with the solution of complaints. These skills include using a win-win approach, using creative responses such as turning problems into possibilities, demonstrating empathy, using appropriate assertiveness, managing emotions, and having a willingness to resolve the issue. If the complainant persists with their complaint, direct them to file their complaint with USDA's Office of Civil Rights. Limited English proficiency, or LEP, are those individuals who don't speak English as their primary language and who have a limited ability to read, speak, write, or understand English. Sponsors must take reasonable steps to assure meaningful access to the information and services they provide to individuals with LEP. All SFSP information should be provided in the necessary languages for all participants and their families. For example, enrollment forms, menus, brochures, and letters should be provided in the necessary language for all participants and their families. A sponsor is required to provide food substitutions or modifications for a child with a dietary disability. A written medical statement completed and signed by a licensed physician, nurse practitioner, or physician assistant is required to be on file when the request falls outside of the meal pattern. If the meal modification falls within the meal pattern, a medical statement is not required. The medical statement must include information regarding the child's impairment and how it restricts their diet, an explanation of what must be done to accommodate the disability, and the foods to be omitted, along with the recommended alternatives. An example of a meal modification that falls within the meal pattern would be an allergy to beef, where the program could then provide chicken instead of beef to meet that meat alternate component. But a meal modification that falls outside of the meal pattern would be a situation where a child could not have fluid milk, for instance, because milk is always part of the meal pattern for breakfast and lunch and supper. So if the child cannot have that, they would need a medical statement signed by a licensed physician, nurse practitioner, or physician assistant in order to receive a modified meal. Applicants and participants must be advised of their right to file a complaint, of how to file a complaint, and of complaint procedures. Any person who believes they've been discriminated against based on the protected classes, which again are national origin, race, sex, color, age, or disability, has a right to file a complaint within 180 days of the alleged discriminatory action. Complaints may be written, verbal, or observed. A complaint may also be anonymous. Anonymous complaints should be handled in the same way as any other complaint. If the complaint is verbal and the person alleging discrimination is not inclined to put the allegation in writing, the person to whom the complaint was made must write up the complaint on behalf of the complainant. So this is one of the new things that came out of the USDA management evaluation and civil rights that the LDOE recently had. All SFSP sponsors and all child nutrition program sponsors must have a civil rights procedure. The civil rights complaint procedure designates a point of contact, which is usually the program director for all discrimination complaints, and describes the procedures that will be followed in accordance with federal civil rights laws and USDA civil rights regulations and policies. So we have a procedure template here on this slide. It can also be found under, if you go to SFSP, you can look under the civil rights section and you'll find it there. You will fill out the form, complete it in there's blanks where you will fill in the blank. And then you need to keep this procedure on file with you. And this is what you will follow if you ever receive a civil rights complaint pertaining to one of those protected classes. And this is something that's new. When handling a civil rights complaint, the first step is to document the complaint and to make an effort to obtain the following information. We need the name, address, and phone number of the complainant, the specific name and location of the entity delivering the benefit or service, the nature of the incident, action, or the method of administration that led the complainant to feel discriminated against, the basis on which the complainant feels discrimination again exists, and this is one of the protected classes: race, color, national origin, sex, age, or disability. The names, titles, business addresses, and phone numbers of the persons who may have knowledge of the discriminatory action, and the date or dates which the alleged discriminatory actions occurred, or if continuing, the duration of such actions. The next step is that all complaints must be forwarded to the Civil Rights Division of the USDA Food and Nutrition Services within 3 days of receiving a complaint. And this is spelled out in that procedure that we talked about on the previous slide. The third step in the civil rights complaint is to maintain documentation. All civil rights documentation should be kept at a central location and should be maintained for 3 years plus the current year. And here is an example of the discrimination complaint form that we're asking everyone to use now. This is the USDA Program Discrimination Complaint Form. It looks different than the one that we've used in years past. This is the USDA version. It's newly adopted for all SFAs and sponsors to utilize in Louisiana. The complaint form, this complaint form, must be made available at all sites participating in the SFSP. So all sites need to have that and Justice for All poster, and they need to have this discrimination complaint form. When an individual wants to report a discrimination complaint, site staff should have as little involvement as possible with the complaint process. All staff must be trained on civil rights and on this civil rights complaint form. The USDA regional office is responsible for the review of state agencies, and then state agencies are responsible for the review of sponsors or of local school food authorities or of sponsors. The state agency has to report any significant civil right findings to USDA. SFAs must receive pre-approval visits to ensure compliance with civil rights before receiving federal funds. So this is for new sponsors. And then compliance is assessed through the administrative review process and through summer food service program reviews. If non-compliance is indicated, a corrective action plan must be implemented to achieve voluntary compliance within 60 days. The corrective action plan should describe the agency's actions to be taken to resolve the non-compliance determined. If the corrective action is not achieved within 60 days, suspension of assistance or termination could result. All participating sponsors must inform potential beneficiaries, particularly minorities, of the availability of the SFSP. Sponsors are required to display the And Justice for All poster in a prominent place at the site in the sponsor's office. All sponsors need to make program information available to the public, take reasonable steps to provide information in appropriate languages other than English based on the frequency encountered, non-English languages of individuals eligible to be served or likely to be affected by the program. Sponsors should ensure translations are accurate and include the non-discrimination statement and instructions for filing a complaint on all materials directed to participants and their families. Sponsors also must take appropriate steps to ensure that communication with people with these disabilities is as equally effective as communication with people without disabilities. In addition, sponsors must ensure meals are served to all attending children, regardless of race, color, national origin, sex, age, or disability, and make sure that all children have equal access to services and facilities. All sponsors must collect beneficiary data each year by race and ethnic category for each site under the sponsor's jurisdiction. And the sponsor must count the participating children at least once during the site's operation. So this is a compliance checklist, and this is a lot of the things that we just went over, but it kind of gives you an overlook of everything that's required in order to maintain civil rights compliance. And lastly, we have a resources slide. If anyone has any additional questions, that concludes our civil rights presentation. If anyone has any additional questions on civil rights or anything else that we covered, feel free to go ahead and submit that now. Please remember to fill out the evaluation by going to the Louisiana Fit Kids website, clicking on today's date, and then filling out the evaluation. We use that feedback to improve our presentations, and it's also what gives us proof of your attendance. Shanna, do you have any other updates or announcements to make?
I don't think I do at this time.
Okay. As always, if you have any questions, the best way to get in touch with us is by sending an email to childnutritionprograms@la.gov. We have wonderful staff who will get your question to the right person. You can also call 225-342-9661. But that central email is a great way to get in touch with us if you have a question about something. I'm not seeing any questions come in, but we thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. We know that you have busy schedules, and we just so appreciate you serving children over the summer to fill in that gap between the school years. So thank you for being with us today, and we will look forward to talking with you soon.